call me a racist of all people. They call me a racist. When you look at my work, when you look at everything I've done, you know that I'm not a racist.
Roger Spooner, the farmer at the center of this controversy, says Sherrod was key in helping him save his farm.
I guess you could say she went out of her way to help us, and I never forgot her either.
Late Tuesday, the NAACP changed its position. It initially condemned Sherrod's remarks, but now says it was, quote, snookered by Fox News and a Tea Party activist.
Good day, everybody. I'm Contessa Brewer covering the big news coast to coast. And the big story this hour is the growing pressure on the federal government to rehire Shirley Sherrod. She was pushed out of her job at the Agriculture Department after a right-wing blogger publicized a video of her speech at the NAACP.
I was struggling with the fact that so many black people have lost their farmland, and here I was faced with having to help a white person save their land. So I didn't give him the full force of what I could do.
Well, critics accused her of racism. The NAACP called her comments shameful. Sherrod says her bosses at the USDA warned her that the White House and the Agriculture Secretary, Tom Vilsack, wanted her out. She says they wouldn't listen to her side of the story. And now for the rest of the story. The blogger Andrew Breitbart significantly edited Sherrod's words, leaving out the climax of her story about the White House, or the white farmers rather. The whole point of her speech, in fact, not there.
Working with him made me see that it's really about those who have versus those who don't. You know, and they could be black, they could be white, they could be Hispanic. And it made me realize then that I needed to work to help poor people.
Well, now the NAACP admits it was, quote, snookered by the right-wing media who publicized the edited video. The Agriculture Secretary is promising to review his decision to ask Sherrod to step aside. And the white farmers who supposedly were victims of Sherrod's racism are rushing to defend and praise her.
I guess you could say she went out of her way to help us. And I never forgot her either. She was, I appreciate everything she done for her. And we got our farm back.
We'll learn more about the White House response to all this 1 hour from now when Press Secretary Robert Gibbs gives his briefing. I spoke with Shirley Sherrod about this controversy earlier today. Ms. Sherrod, could you please explain to me your reaction to this story, the fact that the USDA now says it will reconsider your position within the Agriculture Department?
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to know what to think about that, especially when they would not listen at the very beginning when I said, please look at the whole story, listen to my whole message, and to think that only after so much outpouring of support with the NAACP, realizing they made a mistake and changing now the department at the late hour is now trying to say they are willing to look at it. It's bittersweet, I guess.
In what way was that video edited? What was left out of the video that would have put your comments in context?
You know, the whole message, my whole message is about coming together. I grew up in the segregated South. I grew up in a county that was particularly tough in the early years, and know what that's like. That will know what that's like. So, you know, I spend my message to everyone, white and black, is that it's time for us to come together and move beyond where we were. If they had listened to the whole message, they would have seen that that message hasn't changed. You know, that's what I've said. That's what I say all the time. I've lived the other way. I know that the region can be a better area if we work together on making that happen.
All right. Well, and what's your reaction? I mean, the video edit had you saying that you were struggling with the fact that so many black people lost their farmland. Here you were faced with helping a white person save their land. What point were you making to your audience?
You know, if you look at where, you know, when that was, you know, I was trying to say 24 years ago, that was the way I thought I was, and when I tell the story, I try to help them to see where I was at that point. but I also move on to say where I am now, and where I am now is to say we need to come together.
Yeah, the NAACP
You know, I've said,
says it was snookered by Fox News and by Andrew Breitbart, who's the blogger who edited the video and put it out there in the first place. And they say that they're going to be more suspicious of the sources in the future. What's your reaction to the NAACP, which took a very strong stand calling your comments shameful?
Yeah, you know, that really hurt because when you look at my civil rights work that started 45 years ago, and to have the very agency, you know, that so many of us have looked to through the years, you know, be so quick to judge without getting the facts, and actually coming out with something negative on someone who's, and that someone is me, who's dedicated her life to fairness, to civil rights work all through the years. That hurt, I think,
yeah,
probably even more than the reaction of the Department of Agriculture.
Well, listen, it does look as though the Agriculture Secretary is ready to look at this fully, to look at all the facts in this. I hope it bodes well for you in the future, and I appreciate that you've spent a few minutes with us today. Thanks.
Thank you.
A couple points to make here. Number one is that Shirley says that she was reluctant to even go back, even if the offer was provided to go back to the USDA. She's now saying that she's reconsidering it. If the offer comes, that she'll consider it seriously. Second point here, the blogger in question is denying that he edited the videotape. He says the edited video was provided to him. We've got an interview. Mara Schiavo-Campo sat down with the blogger, so we've got that coming up. My big question today, who's to blame for the rush to judgment? Reverend Jesse Jackson is the head of the Rainbow Push Coalition. Who do you blame for this rush to judgment, Reverend?
Well, those who made a determination to force her to resign or to fire her, clearly this was an excerpted, distorted story centered over rather low cable standards, and this thing became viral. And she was hurt by it, and in some sense maybe damaged by it. She deserves an apology and restoration, and the Department of Agriculture should be investigated for the decision made relative to her.
I had a guy write to me today, Darren Book, who said, I personally think everyone involved in that lady's firing should be ashamed. The White House, the USDA, the NAACP, and the media. What does this say to you about how motivated the administration is by whatever is the controversy of the day on conservative cable?
Well, I think last week, since the Tea Party was so much of a focus of the NAA convention last week, in some sense this was a kind of retaliation to prove that blacks are racist. And so we now have just sunk to a new level of who is a racist. That's not a good thing. I hope that President Barack Obama, when the mission came with Dr. Gates and Sergeant Crowley, he had a kind of beer summit and brought about reconciliation real soon. It'd be beautiful to see Shirley Sherrod, whom I've known for so many years, and the Spooner family come to the White House and be accommodated in some way. This really is a good news ending. Here's a basic rural white family savaged by a rural black woman who now have found common ground. It's a tough story, but it's really a good news ending.
You know, there is the theory out there that this may have been payback for the NAACP accusing the Tea Party of harboring racists. How much is race now becoming the motivating factor in political anger, do you think, Reverend?
It has been there for a long time, and this beyond race does not address the need for a meaningful or racial justice session, the kind that Bill Clinton was trying to put together, because while we have these exceptions in athletics, exceptions in President Barack Obama, blacks are still 3 times the national average in unemployment, for example, number 1 in poverty, number 1 in short life expectancy, number 1 in prenatal deaths, number 1 in school expulsions, 2.3 million Americans in prison, over half are African Americans. So the issue of racial disparity is very real and deserves therefore a meaningful, not only discussion, but also some remedy.
Okay, Reverend Jackson, it's good of you to join us today. Thank you.
Well, we certainly all congratulate Shirley for being so courageous. And her husband, Charles Sherrod, one of the founders of SNCC, this is a great family. And I hope that President Barack will respond, in fact, back and bring them to the White House, the Spooner family, and Shirley. That would be such a great, good news ending to this story.
We'll be watching to see if that happens. And again, Reverend, thanks for your time. Remember, a lot of folks interested in this story, and they've already been reaching out. I'd like to encourage you to do so, too.